I'm Yo-Yo.
And I'm Katia. Welcome to our podcast.
Each week we learn from the experts about all things women's health and happiness.
We are two very normal, imperfect women.
Navigating this crazy thing called life.
And trying to stay happy and healthy while we do it. So, grab a cuppa.
Or tidy away that pile of laundry.
And enjoy our discoveries. Hello and welcome to another week.
Welcome to episode 38.
Yay!
Yes.
And thanks for joining us again. We have a great episode this week. And this week's guest is Dr. Malenka Bissell, who's a paediatric cardiologist and also a clinical lecturer in the paediatric cardiology department at the University of Leeds.
She got her PhD in Oxford in 2009 and has since been working in this field for 15 years.
In the day, she spends her time scanning the hearts of babies and fetuses still in mum's tummy. And on the side, she researches the effects of breast milk on how the hearts develop in young babies born with heart problems.
She's found amazing results in her research, and she goes on about this, she explains this within the episode. And her research has already changed the protocols in her department, and it is her mission to change this practice in the wider medical community as well.
Yeah, you'll understand what we mean by that, because we do talk about it in the episode, and how she's had some amazing results and how it's changed.
Impactful stuff that she's researching. Yeah,
it's incredible. But as we know, this comes with a trigger warning, because sometimes the conversation around how babies are fed can be quite emotive.
Definitely.
And if you find breastfeeding or bottle feeding, that whole conversation triggering in any way, this episode probably is not for you. So we completely understand if you just switch off now. But
we both breastfed, and we talk a lot about our own experiences. So, we understand that if you don't want to listen to that, then that is perfectly fine. We'll have a different expert for you next week.
Yes, and in Weekly Waffle this week on Thursday, we won't be talking about our experiences because we've talked about it in this episode. So we'll acknowledge the episode, but it won't be in depth, and it won't be. So Weekly Waffle won't be all about breastfeeding, basically. But if you do find science fascinating, the whole concept of breastfeeding magical and just incredible, the science behind what Malenka does is actually quite overwhelming. But it's more about, I'm trying to explain the fact it's not about whether you should or shouldn't breastfeed, but it's a very good example of why it's good, especially in young babies that are poorly. And I think on that scale, to show how good it is there, it's incredible. And I think it's really nice to listen to, but it is, obviously all about breastfeeding.
Yes.
So
yeah. But that said, we really enjoyed our conversation with Malenka. She's really scientific, and she's also practicing. So she spends her day, like we said, doing heart scans. Yeah. So it was an absolute pleasure and privilege to have her.
To carve your time out, Malenka. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate how busy you are, and to spend some time with us chatting about this subject was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, to put it into context, I think she'd been at a full day of work, and I think she was still at work when we started chatting at 7:30 in the evening.
And then she was going home to work some more for a meeting tomorrow morning.
So when you said goodbye to her at 9 p.m.
Thank you. We really appreciate her time, and we hope you enjoy everything she has to say, because she is amazing.
Definitely. So, without further ado,
enjoy. Good
evening, Malenka. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's such a privilege actually to have someone like you who is so busy actually join our podcast. So we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really nice to be here and talk about some happy things. So.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So we like to dive straight into the conversation, into the juicy bits.
Yep.
So would you mind giving us an overview, maybe a bird's eye view, about what are the main benefits of breast milk for babies, perhaps when they're small, maybe, and along their life?
Yeah, so I think breast milk is such a fascinating topic, actually. And the most obvious reason is that actually it's just perfectly designed for the baby's body. So it's got the perfect amount of fatty acids, protein, and carbohydrates that just fit babies perfectly. And there's actually been some research that's shown if you have a sick baby or something changes, your milk change accordingly. There's some sort of connection that we can't quite understand that does trigger how your milk changes with how your baby is, which I find absolutely fascinating.
That's magical.
It's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then they're cool things like, it helps with infections, especially when they're little, because all the immune response gets directly passed on to the baby via the breast milk. So if the mum gets triggered by a virus or something, the baby will be affected by it as well, because they tend to be around together. Mum makes all the antibodies, and then that actually helps the baby indirectly as well. So they're less likely to get admitted with infections. It's much easier to digest as well. So especially if it's a baby that's struggling with digesting, it empties quicker in the stomach. So again, if you've got a refluxy baby, that can really help. But also that can mean that sometimes they're more hungry because the tummy empties quicker. So yes, it goes both ways.
It's something I hear often, actually, that the formula keeps them full for longer, which then helps them sleep for longer. That kind of thing.
But that's not how nature designed it, right? And I think there is one really big design flaw. I'm just going to get it out there before I forget to talk about it later, right?
Yes.
So I always tell my mums the story, back in the Stone Age, when it was all a bit dangerous to be out and about, because tigers were out and about during the day, husbands were trying to hunt tigers or mammoths or whatever they were doing, and women were berry hunting. So that wasn't a particularly good time to kind of be cozy and cuddle up and make milk. So actually all of that was left for nighttime when the husbands were back, everybody was huddled up in a cage, the tigers were asleep. That was a good time to relax and make lots of milk. So actually your milk making hormones are highest overnight. That's why babies wake up so much, because that actually increases your milk supply. So especially initially, that's why they're just don't sleep, because actually they need to do it to get your milk supply up. So big design flaw these days.
That makes perfect sense, because you just have to feed throughout the night.
Especially when it starts, the sun goes down, that cluster feed starts.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so it biologically makes sense evolutionarily, but then in our modern lifestyle, it's more difficult.
But then what I'm really interested in, what I find so amazing about breast milk, is actually the effect it has on cardiovascular health and cardiovascular disease. And that's actually for both baby and mum. So even if you weren't breastfed as a baby, actually, if you breastfeed as a mother, it still reduces risk of having heart attacks later in life or strokes. And it reduces your risk for obesity as well. So you lose weight much quicker after you had your babies.
Yes.
And the effect for babies is actually much later. So initially, when they look at studies, they don't really find that much of a difference between things like weight and obesity rates and those sort of things. It's more when they look at teenagers that were breastfed compared to those that weren't. You can find lower rates of obesity, lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, and then in older age, they again find lower risk of heart attacks and strokes. So there's obviously a lot that we don't fully understand yet, but we're starting to see those associations quite clearly in big cohort studies where we look at loads and loads of people across countries.
That's amazing. Are there any hypotheses to the mechanisms why breast milk has this long-term protective effect?
So a lot of it is about learning how to responsively feed, is what I think. So when you breastfeed, you decide yourself when you're full, right? It's a bit harder to breastfeed. It's when you bottle feed, you kind of have a swallow reflex, so you automatically swallow. Even if you're full, you may still carry on swallowing if the milk kind of keeps trickling into your mouth, whereas breastfeeding is a much more active component. So babies learn to self-regulate much better, and therefore then also as a toddler learn to know when they're full much more easily. And that, I think, is a big part when you think about late-term obesity and things like that. And then a lot of it is about, as we know, having healthy fatty acid, having a healthy diet. That's what's important to us. And breast milk for babies is, in inverted commas, the healthiest diet that you can produce, because it has the healthiest fatty acids and those sort of things.
Yes, and I think, aren't there like a mix of the medium chain fatty acids or some almost magical fatty acid component that is difficult to replicate?
Correct.
Can you maybe explain that a little bit?
Well, that's getting a bit beyond.
Okay. I was going So basically, there's something that your breast milk, a fatty chain that it makes that can't be replicated in.
There's some very magic fairy dust in there is what I always call it. So we have some basic scientists that kind of take breast milk apart a lot more. I'm much more interested in seeing how that kind of affects long-term effects. And one of the things that's really important for us is how breast milk can help our sicker babies. So both of those babies that were born early, so born prematurely, but then also our cardiac babies, so babies that have heart conditions or chronic diseases already. Because especially in those, it's a lot harder to be able to breastfeed if you're stuck in hospital. It's really hard. But we are seeing more and more that actually the benefits that we see in the general population are probably amplified if we get it right in those sicker babies. And that's where a lot of my interest comes in, which is a lot more difficult to scientifically prove because they're already smaller cohorts of patients. And then you're kind of adding in yet another factor.
Just a question on when the baby's so poorly, and if the mums, because obviously when the mums, they're so little or so poorly, if the mum can't do it for no reason of her own, because sometimes it's so difficult when they're so small and they're so poorly. Does it matter if it's the mum's breast milk in that case, or would any be better than?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? So it's really hard to establish your milk supply and breastfeeding when your baby isn't actually feeding, right? And you have to all do it by pumping. So first of all, you have to set yourself an alarm every 3 hours and especially you have to get up overnight, right? You're exhausted looking after your sick kid, and really you need to set yourself an alarm because that's when your milk making hormones are highest. That's quite a big ask for some mums, so it's really, really hard. So it can take longer for milk supply to come in and be established, and babies may need more liquid or more milk earlier on if they're sick. And so most hospitals actually have a milk donation bank where women can donate milk, and I think that's such a fantastic thing to do. It's a bit like donating blood. So you donate milk, it then gets pasteurized and obviously made safe, and that can then be given to all of the babies. It's not quite the same because most of the time it's done from women that have older babies. So again, the makeup will not be quite the same, right? Their very early milk actually has got very little liquid and loads of just high, dense calorie milk to kind of tie the babies over the colostrum.
It's like
the gold,
thick golden.
I remember spilling some of that after I'd pumped in. I think I cried my eyes out. It was like magic dust. I was like, understand the phrase of "don't cry over spilt milk." I was like, we definitely do in this case.
I think there's been many mums who've cried over spilled milk.
Oh, that magic. Yeah. Okay, so it can help, but it's one of those. Ideally from the mum earlier on.
That's even better. And actually, there's quite a lot of interesting things going on. So some women are now suggest that they can actually start expressing colostrum before the baby's even born. So from about 38 weeks onwards. So I did that with mine because mine was due to be quite small. I was also really fed up with being pregnant. So I thought, if I can maybe evict her a bit early, that would be great.
Because they say it can potentially bring on labour.
It didn't. But so there I was from 38 weeks kind of expressing, and it was such a good thing because I had syringes full of frozen milk. So when she came out really little, she never needed any additional formula because I had all of these basically like high energy, high sugar boost milk syringes that she just got as extras.
Yes.
And everyone's like, oh my God, how did she not drop her blood sugar? And I'm like, well, magically.
Amazing. And even a syringe with 1 milliliter, I think, that is such a tiny amount, but for a tiny baby,
that's amazing.
That is actually a good snack. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's another really important thing. So our really sick babies, even if they have to go to surgery like within the first day of life, if we can get even just that tiny bit of colostrum in, because that will just coat the entire gut with good gut bacteria. So it's that first bit of colostrum that will kind of decide what your gut bacteria will look like. And if you can get that in before they go to surgery, again, they're much more likely to tolerate milk afterwards because their gut has been colonized with the good bacteria rather than any other bacteria that may have been picked up along the way.
Amazing. Wow. So can women also donate syringes of colostrum if they potentially made them, but their baby didn't need them and they put them in the freezer? Will hospitals accept those as well?
I mean, that would be so amazing, right? But the amounts are so small, and once they've pasteurized and done all of the safety things that I need to do, I think there'd be nothing left. But yeah, I know that'd be so good, wouldn't it?
Because I remember I was fairly lucky with our boy that my milk supply did come in quickly, and I filled syringes and syringes and put them all in the freezer, and I just had to throw them all away eventually.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. I mean, I fed all of mine to my little ones. Like, well, you're having them anyway. I worked so hard for them.
I'm putting this in your porridge when you're 6 months old. Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. I think the only thing I remember trying to do that with ED, my first, and try and express colostrum, and it's just not happening.
No, same. When I tried when I was pregnant, nothing was coming out.
Yeah.
And it made me a little bit worried about whether I would produce enough milk.
But then that wasn't. And then my breast, as soon as the reason I went to labour, my boob started to leak. Like, that's how I knew the contractions start. Boob started to leak. I was like, here it is. I've been waiting for weeks to try and get you. So yeah, it's such a funny thing. But like, yeah, breastfeeding is such an emotional kind of journey, and it all depends on mum and baby, doesn't it? So I think, but that would be amazing if they could harvest, or people could donate colostrum just to help those tiny babies. But it's fascinating that even just a small amount at such a small age can have such a profound effect.
They've got such their stomachs are like the size of a grape or something.
Yeah, they're tiny.
Yeah.
Tiny little stomachs.
Crazy.
Wow. So your current you're looking at the cardiology side. Is that in baby, like fetuses, babies, and older, or is it across the spectrum?
Yeah. So how I kind of got back into breastfeeding research, really, or the safety of breastfeeding our sicker babies, was slightly unrelated, actually. So I was looking at safer ways of how to image our babies in 3D. So we do a lot of CT scans, but which uses radiation and contrast. And I thought, would there be a safer way? So I do a lot of MRI in older children, which doesn't use radiation or contrast. And so I came across feed and wrap MRI scans where they have a feed, then they get swaddled, and then they go in the MRI scanner, which works great for brains. And I developed all sorts of techniques of how to do it for cardiac babies. But then those cardiac babies that really need those imaging, at that stage, most of our protocols, and that's pretty much across the country at that point, weren't allowed to feed, because we were so worried that if they don't have enough blood supply going into their guts, it's a bit like the premature born babies, that they won't be able to have enough blood supply or to digest the milk, and then that can cause some really severe gut problems, which kind of can be an infection. And it can actually kill them. So it is a really, really serious infection that you can get. Oh, wow. So none of our babies were allowed to feed. And I was like, well, how am I going to feed and wrap a baby if they're not allowed to feed? And they're super cross because they're hungry.
What would they be eating if they couldn't feed?
So they would be getting fluid through a drip, and they'd be getting medicine through a drip. They would get nutrition, but obviously nothing in their tummy, so they would feel hungry until they would have their surgery within the first week of life.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So we then went and looked at all of our babies over the last 5 years, because some of them didn't have the diagnosis until after they were born. So they would have been feeding for a little bit before they then had the diagnosis, and we stopped the feed. So we then looked at those that just had breast milk compared to those that had formula milk. And what we found is that none of our babies that only had breast milk got this infection of the gut. So the only infections of the gut that we found were those that had formula. Okay. And so we then said, we'll design a feeding protocol where those babies are actually allowed to have breast milk if breast milk is available. So if the mum is happy to provide. And it was interesting because there was a really long discussion within our department whether that's asking our mums to do too much, and that not everybody wants to breastfeed. So it was a really interesting discussion. And what we found is that actually we've not had a single mum who wasn't happy to at least express something initially, if that was the only thing baby could have. Even if ultimately they didn't go on to breastfeed, we've not had a single mum that didn't at least give it a go to get some colostrum and some milk off, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. I think that's such an interesting turn of events from what you hear. Yes. I suppose what you hear is that people are like, I don't want to, and things, but when you're asking for like, this is actually, it's potentially such a big thing for everyone to express is incredible.
Yeah. I actually think that, I mean, there could be a very small percentage of women who just don't want to, and I completely respect that as well. but I think the vast majority want to, but they eventually don't because there's not enough support, or they're giving wrong information, like the whole, babies should be sleeping through the night, they shouldn't be feeding, whereas actually we've heard from you that it's completely normal for babies to feed all night long. But I think eventually it might not work out long term for many women because they're not quite given maybe the right information.
I think we hope you're enjoying this episode so far. We'd love to help more women out there, so please subscribe, rate and review, which helps more people find us. And share this episode with any friends who you think will enjoy it too. Thank you. And without further ado, here's the rest of the episode. I think in that situation, maybe being in hospital, being with the baby and someone saying to you, like, we'll help you, this is what it is, just shows that everybody said yes. That there is something there that everybody has that urge to help their baby survive in the best possible way. That mother, that motherness, like, what's the word? Mother
instinct, isn't it?
Yeah. It just kicks in, and they just want to keep their baby alive and keep them healthy and happy. And I think that's so heartwarming that every single mum said yes.
Yeah, amazing.
And it's been really great because our charity, so Children's Heart Surgery Fund, they've actually donated a whole lot of money so that we can make a better breastfeeding room, that we actually have a breastfeeding milk fridge in the parents' accommodation that wasn't there. So if you were expressing overnight, you had to walk all the way back to the ward to put it in a fridge. It's little things like that. So we looked at everything like privacy screens to give parents a bit more privacy with the children, and, all those little things to just make life a bit easier.
Amazing.
That's incredible. Those little things do make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like walking to go and put the fridge, you're like already so tired. That's make or break for some mums, is that long walk when they're just like, someone take this milk from me.
But it's those things that are actually really hard to put into action because you need to find somebody who will daily check the temperature of the milk fridge. And that was actually one of the hardest, to get the milk fridge into parents' accommodation,
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
You just don't think about the logistics like that, do you?
And it's such like practicalities that can get in the way of such important things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's something so minor as the fridge, being available, which for most people seems like a no-brainer. Like, of course there's a fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. So the positive is that everyone's like, every mom has been like, yes, we'll try and express. So have you seen amazing, huge results from?
Yeah, so all of our babies are now allowed to have breast milk. They all do. And so they tolerate the milk really well. They all tolerate it, the feeds after surgery much quicker. And actually, on average, babies now go home 2 days earlier than to what they used to, because they build up feeds much quicker and they get to go home much quicker.
Wow. And so it was all based initially, there was just... the medical people were just being really
cautious,
worried. Theoretically, this could be a bad thing. But having done this research, you've established, actually, we didn't have to be so worried about breast milk.
It's only the formula that makes it bad. Yeah.
Yes.
But also that just doing that has just made such a difference. Like, you just being like, okay, well, let's just look at what babies and what happens, and actually who's been ill and who's got this. And wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I mean, I have to say, a lot of it is due to our utterly amazing dietitian. Like with Alex, is our dietitian in the hospital for our cardiac babies, and she's just like, she's such whiz. I wanted to get on the podcast with me, but she's like, no, I'm not coming. I know, because she could have answered all those questions about like all the components of the milk. So the way she thinks about it is just amazing, because one of the other really big myths that we try to bust all the time is that you can't grow on breast milk, like babies don't grow on breast milk, and that's so not true. So even our cardiac babies who have loads of extra calorie requirements grow on breast milk. And she kind of just adds some extra energy shots in, almost like medicines, with some really easy to digest extra fatty acids and things like that, to just give them that extra energy. So they still have all of the goodness and easy to digest. And then they just have those kind of energy bombs added in to gain weight.
Yeah.
But it took her,
it
really took her to show that we can grow our babies on breast milk.
Does she, I don't know, this might be a question for her, so you don't have to answer it, but does she have a theory on whether the mums should be eating particular types of fats or whatever?
No.
To make the, no.
So, I mean, very, very rarely we ask them not to eat dairy if we've got a really allergic baby, like really allergic baby. But that's very, very rare in the majority of times. That's the other thing. So that's what I always say to the dads. The biggest problem is actually stressed mums. Stressed mums don't make milk. So if your body is under stress, it kind of goes into self-preservation mode, and you just don't make as much milk. And when you're stressed and you're trying to look after your baby, you forget to eat, you don't look after yourself, and you can't make milk. So we always say to the dads, well, your job is to look after mum so that she, feels less stressed, has her favourite food, so she actually has got energy left to make milk. So that is actually the most important thing, is to try to not be too stressed.
Definitely. Less stress, eat enough and drink enough, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember being thirsty.
That any woman who's breastfed will say, oh, that thirst.
Yes.
That breastfeeding thirst.
Is it right that breast milk is made from your blood? Is that right?
Well,
Or have I messed that up?
ish.
Because I got something told at NCT it was made. I can't remember what it was made from, but then someone else said, "Oh, it's made from your blood," and I was like, "I don't know. Is it?
Is it filtered out through the breast tissue from the plasma?
Well, I mean, that is the medium of how everything gets transported over your body. So certain nutrients and elements and stuff, yes, come through your blood to your breast tissue, who then actually makes the milk with it. So indirectly is sort of does.
But it's all made in your breast.
But that's why actually very, very few women can't breastfeed. So this whole myth about, my breast didn't make enough milk. Unless you've actually had the majority of your breast tissue taken away, or you had implants that are, I think, sat completely underneath the tissue or something, those are the things where it will be really difficult to breastfeed. Other than that, irrespective of the size of your boobs, it will make enough milk for your babies. And a lot of that is, it's that myth around just not having had enough help, isn't it? So not getting the milk going in the earlier days, thinking my baby should sleep, rather than using that time to say, oh yes, they're making more milk making hormones in my breast, so actually it's all going to start going. So the night feeds are just so important, and it's about all these myths that it should just be like formula feeding your baby, and it's not. It is hard work initially. It definitely is.
It's a very different thing. And I remember when our little boy was 1 week old, and I don't want to speak badly of the older generation, because I love the older generation, but you have a lot of people who've forgotten what it was like to have a very young baby, and will say, oh, my baby slept through the night in the first week. Is yours. And I think, and that's just, they've probably forgotten all the negative memories of how difficult it was.
Someone said to me, you said it's like about breastfeeding, is that it may be the most natural, it doesn't mean it's the easiest. And like, it's the most natural thing, but it doesn't mean it's easiest. Easiest. And I was very lucky that I had some women around me who struggled with their first, and I struggled with my first, I struggled a lot to breastfeed. But once it clicked, it was like, oh my gosh, yes, this is the most natural, easiest thing in the world. But those first 6 weeks were like, I had to persevere, and through clenched toes. I can explain my journey later on. But I do think the myth of not making enough milk, and with the help that is there, isn't always right either. Like, mine was a latching issue, that she had a compressed jaw. So all I had to do was turn my nipple 30 degrees and she latched perfectly. But no one for 2 weeks told me that until I got a lactation consultant. And that's where a lot of people would be like, done.
Yeah. Yes.
And they're like, don't use nipple shields. I'm like, and then my lactation consultant was like, yes, use them, let yourself heal, and use them as much as you need. And then when you're ready to take off, take off. And it's like, there's so many, you should do this, this, and this. I think mums, as you said, the information, the support, it's all not too clear.
Yeah.
Some people say this and some people say that. And then it's whoever you get to fully support you, and if your partner is supporting you too.
Yeah, and I think it's something you just don't see in public, right? So you actually have no idea what a good latch looks like. You have absolutely no idea, because you just don't see it. It's still something we don't talk about, and something we don't see in public, and that's why it's so hard initially. In countries where it's a lot more open and a lot more public, again, there are less breastfeeding issues, because you grow up with it, you see it, you know what a good latch looks like, you know what you're looking for.
Yeah. And you also know, I guess, who to ask. Yeah. If all the women in your family, or your aunties and your mum and your older sisters or friends did it, you've got all that support around you. I asked my sister-in-law, who when we had our boy, she had 2 children already, and she was like one of those women that breastfeeds forever and ever and ever, which I totally respect. So she came and said, oh, okay, maybe move this way, maybe get the nipple higher in the mouth. And that was really useful.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's the thing, as you said, like when it's open, it's in your culture to just be like, boobs are out, baby's on, and you be like, it's not a thing to be like embarrassed about. Whereas here, like, you feel like you should cover up. Like, I think the only last person I saw breastfeeding, I was 12 years old, and a close friend had it, and then I'd never seen anyone else breastfeed.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, but it is changing a little bit. I think there's a good, there's kind of change in that the long-term breastfeeding is now becoming more popular. Like long-term, I mean, like maybe until age 2, 3. But then there's also this whole wave of, which I also completely respect, that we have to be super mindful that it's a very emotive subject.
Yeah.
And if someone did desperately want to do it and something got in the way, it's difficult, isn't it? You don't want to make them feel really guilty about it.
Yeah, it's things like, especially things like, I suppose in America, like, and where like maternity leave is so different. Like here, we're quite lucky that maternity leave is like paid up until a certain. It's not amazing amount of money, so it depends on your company. But in America, they expect you back after like 6 weeks.
Yeah. And I think we also have to remember not everybody can afford a lactation consultant, right? So we've got the privilege of having the finances to do that, and we thought about it and we saved some money up beforehand. But not everybody will have that money. They're not, they're not cheap.
And I was going to the infant breastfeeding units, and I was going in there, and I was having the midwives every other day because Edie wasn't putting weight on, and the information wasn't right off like 5, 6 different midwives. Not like their fault, like it's still until that one woman came.
Yeah,
it's like, and I was lucky that I could afford her.
And we have to remember, like midwives are amazing, but they've got to look at everything, the entire child, the development, the mum, everything. Breastfeeding is one element, whereas a lactation consultant, that's all they do is like boobs and babies, right?
Yeah.
And how to match those two up. And that's what they spend all day long. So, and midwives and health visitors, they're amazing at providing support, but sometimes when things are a bit tricky, like in your case, we just needed that extra tweak, that's where you need an expert. And really that should be free in the NHS, right? You should be able to access those experts for free.
100%.
Absolutely. I was very lucky when our boy was born, that immediately after my cesarean, I think there was maybe a specialist midwife who was breastfeeding specialized, because she was right in there. Do you mind if I move your boob into position? I was like, please do. Helping me get the right latch. And I don't know how I would have done it without her. So I felt fortunate.
It's an interesting, it's everyone's journey. But as you said, I think that support is like, it's basic. It would be amazing if everyone had that one support of that one person that's all they did. It'd be incredible. So what's the taking it back to like the cardiology side of it, are there any known benefits of what it can do, breast milk can do in later life?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some really interesting studies where that were originally set up for other reasons, but they had different group of babies. So again, they're early born babies because they're much easier to research and they get followed up for long-term outcomes anyway. So there were babies that just had breast milk, then some that had preterm formula, and some that had term formula. And actually, my colleagues, when I was still in Oxford, then made use of that cohort and said, well, let's look at it 20 years later and see whether we can already see any factors in terms of cardiovascular health. And what we found was that those babies that had breast milk, those early premature born babies, their heart looked a lot more normal than it would in their healthy counterparts compared to those that had formula. So obviously there's been more remodeling back to a more normal shape of the heart, so just the way the heart is shaped. So the ventricles were bigger, much more closely related to what the normal size was expected. But also during exercise, we then already saw in those preterms with some that had formula, some abnormal contraction, so the heart muscle wasn't working quite as well during exercise as it would have done in other in healthy children or in those that had breast milk. So we can already see that, especially in those babies that maybe had a slightly harder start to life, breast milk can actually counteract some of those difficulties they would have encountered and some of those long-term effects on cardiovascular health. And so we are now, of course, really interested to see how that would then also support our cardiac babies further that very clearly have heart problems. So whether we can improve their heart function with giving breast milk early as well.
Wow. So not only just from the scanning point of view of being able to be fed and the risk of infection, that they can be fed, they can go in and be scanned, can see things. They can now. There's a long-term benefit.
Yeah.
Into their 20s.
Well, that's what we're hoping. I mean, obviously, we need to wait for 20 years now. And see.
Yes.
We're all waiting patiently for 20 years.
So how old are those? Is that cohort now that the findings have been found in?
They're in their 30s now, aren't they? Yeah, because it was a good 10 years ago when we looked at them in their 20s. Yeah.
Wow.
So obviously, they'll probably get looked at again in another 10 years or so, and then they can, start looking at incidents of, so the secondary cardiovascular disease, such as, plaque formation in your arteries and those sort of things that the adults like to look at.
That's fascinating. It's so nice that to know that there is longitudinal research like that going on. But it's a waiting game, of course, if they're in the 30s.
Yeah. And also, they're the cohort that were there. They were like, right, we're going to use you for everything now because you're the ones who were tested when you were born.
Lifelong guinea pigs.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, amazing.
Oh, bless them.
So maybe if you don't mind sharing, what about yourself personally? Have you got a personal journey with breastfeeding?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting, isn't it? So as a paediatric doctor, you're apparently supposed to know how to breastfeed. And I'm like, I haven't got a clue. So it was requiring me a lactation consultant to figure out how this was all going to work. Because again, you don't really see it often enough, do you? And then my little one had a tongue tie. So initially it was really hard. Like she was feeding every hour. And I was like, I know they need to feed often, but this is really often. So once she had that done, so they kind of snipped the tongue tie, that made a huge difference. But in the process, I then developed oversupply. So I had way too much milk at that point, because that was like 3-4 weeks down the line, because she was feeding so much. Because she couldn't get as much at a time. I just had loads of milk and I had like exploding ginormous boobs and didn't know what to do with it. So I just started doing 1 or 2 pumps a day, and everyone's like, no, you must not do that because otherwise your milk supply will never adjust to what your baby wants. I'm like, yeah, I can't cope. I just have to do it. So I got in the habit of donating milk, and I carried that on throughout my whole breastfeeding journey, because obviously I always had about 1 or 2 bottles too much. At one point when she was about 8 months, I had to go to America for work and didn't really want to take her for the 5 days. So I did actually build up, I think, about 10 litres worth of milk in the freezer. So my husband would have enough milk.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So, but it then turned out, so something I also didn't know, and don't ask me about these scientific details because I didn't look into it, but depending on what sort of fatty acids your milk has, it can easily be frozen or not. So mine, if it wasn't frozen straight away, it did smell a bit weird. My child was not having any of it. And even when it was frozen straight away, it's just like some of the fatty acids just kind of break down in a funny way, and it smells rancid, and it probably doesn't taste very well. Some babies don't mind, but my child wasn't having any of it. So actually she really wasn't a big fan of this frozen milk. So when I came back, I think 8 litres of it was still there, and she just decided to get on with weaning. So I'm like, what am I going to do with all this milk? So I did end up donating all of that as well. So
yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. I had to do a bit of reading about it because I looked at it and went like, oh my God, this is like utterly disgusting.
It's funny, isn't it? I remember they were like, there's not even much about storage. We had to Google because I got mastitis because I think I got oversupply after she finally figured out feeding, after being after we suddenly all my milk came in, and I suddenly got
a similar situation.
Yeah, and then I had to like Google how to store it and like where to put it in the fridge and like which bottles, and I had to like stickers on of which one went in first and which one you can't mix them. And then it was like, this one can be frozen here. And then it was just such a complex thing. I was like, I think I had frozen ones in there, and I ended up using it in her like when she was weaning. But like, it is so hard you have to really Google what you have to do with it. There's not like much help there either.
And actually a lot of it doesn't matter. I mean, there's the whole discussion about, do you need to sterilize equipment that you use breast milk in? And there's a lot of thought that actually you don't, because all the goodness in the milk and all the antibodies and everything get rid of any potential bugs, and you can just use it as is, which again makes life a lot easier. So if you, if you express and feed, because some people prefer that to the actual breastfeeding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's nice that you can be a little bit more relaxed about that. Yeah. I remember we were sterilizing everything, and then when our baby was, I don't know, 5 months and crawling around. When he started crawling around and literally licking the floor, we're like, okay, we're going to stop sterilizing because this is drop in the ocean. Yeah.
Oh, so you have you got more than one child?
No, so I've only got one. Yeah.
Okay, but your breastfeeding journey was until the tongue tie and the oversupply.
Well, yeah, no, what's interesting is that my child refused to take a bottle. Like, literally refused to have a bottle. So I
I
spent so much of my life going like, how am I going to go back to work? This child isn't going to feed in nursery. Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And
We had exactly the same.
and and then so that is my one biggest regret. I think the hours I spent trying to get her to take a bottle, because like, why? She didn't anyway. So she then transitioned straight onto sippy cap. And actually, what she did for a while, which did nearly kill me, is she then decided to just cluster feed overnight, right, and make up for the missed liquid in the day. And I'm like, great, this is fantastic.
Well, after nursery, she'd be like, "Oh, you're home. Time to go."
Yep. Like probably fasting
Oh, no.
all day at nursery, and then
Yeah.
here's
bless her.
mom.
So I
missed
wish
you.
I'd just not spent so much energy trying to get her to take it, because it wasn't going to happen anyway. So
You must have been buying every single bottle
Yeah.
on the market, and maybe
With the
this
different
shape,
teeth.
maybe this shape.
you look at your
Yeah.
own nipple and it's like, oh right, I need to find a bottle that looks like just no.
Yeah.
Being to get it moulded professionally, personalised, moulded. No.
But it was quite funny because
Also-
nursery once tried to then so I then gave in frozen breast milk into nursery. Nursery was great and gave it, and she had a bit and stuff, and she actually just picked up weaning, but she was equally stubborn with that. Like, she did baby-led weaning, she wasn't going to be fed with a spoon, no way. And but then once they accidentally tried to give her some formula, the whole thing just went flying across the carpet. Because actually, if you look at it, I mean, it's like a disgusting grainy texture. It's weird.
Yeah. If then, she's like, "What are you poisoning me with?
I don't want this.
This is not my milk. What is this?" Oh, bless her.
Oh, that's so funny.
Oh.
Yeah. Have you got any bugbears, or how do you call it, pet
Pet
peeves,
peeves.
Oh, yeah.
about the world of formula, breastfeeding, all of it?
Well, actually, we don't talk enough about it. You don't see it, and
Yeah.
we don't talk enough about it. That's my biggest peeve. It's all happening behind closed doors, isn't it? It's not out there
Yeah.
as like natural. It's like one of the most hotly debated topics, but actually, it should just be natural.
Yeah.
What I would love is that we don't make a big deal. We don't like talk it to death in as a very controversial topic, and it's just out there and it's just there, and either you do or you don't.
Yeah. I do often see, well, because we go to playgrounds a lot, we have very young children. I do often see a woman sitting on the bench breastfeeding a baby, and it's, at least where we live, it's becoming more seen, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think I run events for mums with babies and mums, and they would happily breastfeed at these events, and also I'd do it so it's I'd try and get a point where it was like a couch and they could easily just breastfeed there, and it's quite an open thing.
Yeah.
But then that was also tried to get it so they weren't in the public eye as much.
Yeah.
So it was quite real closed off. But it is one of those things, and also if it wasn't so much of a, I don't know, because it's so emotive for some reason. It's like then it becomes a big stressful thing. Like, oh, did you breastfeed or did you bottle? It's like, does it matter? It's like, why is that even a question?
Yeah.
Like, why do we need to talk about it that much? Like, why does it need to be this big? Which way did you go? And
I can imagine, though, at the time when you're in it, when you're in the thick of it, I wanted to talk about it because it was such a big part of my life.
Yeah, but then you wouldn't. Yeah, you would with other people who are in it too.
Yes.
Like, you wouldn't go to somebody who wasn't breastfeeding and so want to talk about it. And also, as me coming into a situation with a new mum, unless they're comfortable talking about it, I wouldn't talk about it either.
Yeah.
It's unless they need to ask help or how they need to feel like, or they want me to know how my journey was. Or something similar happened to me, like mastitis or something like that. That's when I'd talk about it to them, but nothing like I wouldn't go and have an open conversation because you don't know someone's journey, unless it's asked and opened with, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like the kind of in public covering up. Do you not? I was quite like almost feminist about it, and I was like, I do not want to have one of those big cover-uppy things. I don't want to sit under a blanket. I had just breastfeeding t-shirts and stuff, and I thought, I'm just going to breastfeed. Like, I don't have to hide myself. So I kind of did have a bit of an attitude of, if people aren't happy with it, I don't care. They can look away.
That's really good that you're like that and you're confident like that. Like, I think a lot of people, and I've heard like really bad stories where mums have been breastfeeding outside and they're confident, but people have come up to them and said like, why are you doing that, like in restaurants? And I think my mum had someone say that to her when she was breastfeeding me and my sister, and they said, oh, like, should you be doing that in a restaurant? And she was like, well, you're eating your food. like my baby needs to eat their food.
Yeah.
And she's like, but a lot of people that you're so tired, you're emotional anyway. Those baby days, like someone saying that to you could literally be like, I'm going to burst into tears now. Like, why?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although you said your mum said it, so that's clearly a little while ago.
Yeah.
Have you heard of anyone recently?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
you have
Loads.
heard of a
Yeah.
recent
On like
example?
posts and like lots of like there's lots of threads on lots of apps and like discussions about like people having these horrible like occasions where like people come up and be like, you shouldn't do that in public.
Oh gosh, they should meet me.
Well, I took my 3-month-old to one of the adult cardiology conferences, like one of the big conferences in Barcelona, and I took husband and child. So I was invited to talk. I was like, that's great, but I'm on maternity leave, so I'm going to have to bring them all. And so I baby wore a lot because I couldn't cope with this pram situation, just couldn't cope, too much baggage. And so she was asleep, strapped to me, and, they always have to take a picture so they can put it up before you give your talk. And they were like, you appear to have a baby strapped to yourself. I'm like, yes. And they were like, well, we can't take a picture of you without the baby in it. I was like, well, just take a picture with the baby in it. But, they were like all these little things. They were like, we don't really know how to deal with this situation. This does not normally happen to us. But again, I mean, that's 10 years ago. I think, and again, in most of the paediatric cardiology conferences, see mums with babies all the time. And I think it's so lovely. So I think it is changing.
That's amazing.
Because otherwise
that's awesome.
It's really hard for women to kind of stay in the know and kind of see what's going on, especially in research and stuff, if you're out for 6 months. And so it's really, really nice that things are getting more inclusive, both like bringing babies to events, but then obviously also having, being brave enough to breastfeed in those public events.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, no, it is hard. I think glad it is changing, but it does feel like it has been stacked against a lot of mums. Like mums in like recent years, I think. So I think it is changing. I think a lot of people have been like, no, like why? This is one of the best things we can naturally do for our babies. Don't make any more obstacles.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So you touched on it a little bit about what do you think the extra help women could have that would help. So you mentioned things like if the NHS funded a lactation consultant, for example. Is there anything else that you have in your perfect world that you think society would do?
It's like things like the fridge
to make this a perfect, much easier for the majority of women to breastfeed.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? But I think there's definitely that thing. Everybody gets basic breastfeeding support, right? But then if their problems is that kind of that there's somewhere to escalate to, so somewhere they can be referred to, right? Like a lactation consultant within the NHS. I think that would be really important that there's like a step up where they can be referred for as, tricky breastfeeding cases, just like we refer up any other things to experts. I think that would be a big thing. From the hospital point of view, things that we're kind of working on more as well is like, what if mum gets admitted and she's breastfeeding? Can baby stay with mum? And again, that's discussed quite a lot sometimes, isn't it? Because that's really difficult to facilitate in a hospital, for example. And then, of course, a lot of it is around breastfeeding children that do have additional needs or chronic health conditions, because that's where breastfeeding rates really are very, very low. So to see what additional help can be provided for those that already have all the other things to worry about. Those are the things that are kind of really close to my heart.
What do you find any challenges after babies had their surgery? Is it harder then if the mum has been pumping? Can the baby sometimes be like? Is it sometimes some cases where it just does not naturally happen because it's been too long, or do you think that, I suppose, is there any chance of the baby will still latch if they're used to it? Is there a certain time frame? Have you noticed anything where it's like?
I don't think there's much of a. Well, I mean, if it's months and months, but then they won't take a bottle either. So they either feed orally or don't. I don't think there's that much of a difference between taking a bottle and the boob. Sometimes you find some of our babies just don't have enough energy to initially, because breastfeeding is harder work than bottle feeding, definitely.
Yes.
But then we have quite a few that do transition on. But initially our babies could kind of after heart surgery, they get fed through a tube, so they have a little tube through their nose that goes into their stomach. But again, they'd have breast milk through that. But then a lot of them do beautifully transition on to breastfeeding. I would say equally as they do to bottle feeding. Sometimes it can be a little bit more frustrating because they do need to learn how to latch on and do that in a slightly delayed way. But the benefit they have is because if mum has been pumping, is they get an instant reward. You know, they don't need to build up the milk supply anymore. That's already there. So once they figure out how to latch, they suddenly get loads of milk. So, you know, they have that instant, this is how it works feedback. And so then actually, once they figured it out, it can actually work real quick.
Amazing. Yeah, all the pumping, all the hard work was done by the mum. All the hours of pumping through the night.
Yeah.
I have an example of one of my friends. They went through a really difficult situation where their baby was super, super premature, like 27 weeks or something. And she made it, thankfully. But she was in the hospital for 4 months, I think, on oxygen. When she went home, oxygen tank home as well. But my friend was really into breastfeeding and she was doing a lot of pumping. But my friend mentioned to me something like she wasn't allowed to actively breastfeed her baby from the midwives. They said you should only pump and give it in a bottle. But then my friend was like, she would sometimes breastfeed her baby because that's what she really wanted to do.
Aww.
And she said she would literally feel guilty about breastfeeding her baby.
Oh my gosh, that's heartbreaking.
I'm just wondering, were these midwives on the right track, or was it maybe a little bit too harsh? What do you think?
It's really hard, isn't it? Because some babies do tire on the breast real quick, and if they're really worried about, getting enough milk into those babies, it is easier to get in via bottle, absolutely, and it is kind of safer because you know how much they've had, and so that that's kind of ingrained that we need to know how much they had. You need to make sure that they expend minimal energy, getting as much energy as they can. But again, this is all slowly changing. So we're certainly putting more emphasis on saying, that's fine, we'll just put some of the feed down the tube. But if they want to breastfeed, we'll try our best to have them at least breastfeed, even if it's just 2 or 3 times a day, if that's all they've got energy for. And then say, well, let's put the rest down the tube, rather than say they would probably even have enough energy to bottle feed, but not to breast. So we then say do breast and do a bit of tube feeding in addition. And kids can go home with tube feeding as well. So certainly in our unit, we're trying to be really proactive if that's what the parents choose to do.
Okay.
So is this, your research with all the with being able to be fed before they're scanned and all this, is that being rolled out everywhere? Is it still just in your unit? Have you been able to push it?
So I think more and more units have gotten to the same ideas as we are, because I think the whole world is changing, right? But we certainly presented our results at some of the paediatric cardiology conferences. So again, our dietitian done some beautiful posters and some presentations to show to the whole of Europe, saying, look, it's safe. So we're really hopeful that more and more units are picking up on that. So we now need to write it up in a scientific paper, which is actually really hard. Because because it's not traditional science, right? It's as everyone says, that sounds really fluffy, doesn't it? But it's equally important.
That must be even more difficult. Yes. Yeah, I come from an academic background, and writing papers was the bane of my life. It was not something I enjoyed, and especially if it's a slightly quote unquote fluffier subject.
It's really hard.
That's more difficult to put into very short, succinct sentences.
And then actually find a journal that it fits and wants to publish it. You'd be surprised.
Yes. Because it's more, in a way, interdisciplinary. Yeah. It's kind of life. And doesn't perfectly fit in a box of a discipline. Yeah. Oh, good luck with that, though. Because it sounds like it's really important research to get out there.
Yeah, it's exciting. And incredible research to find that.
Yeah.
It changes so much. But so I think I'm fascinated by it. I think breastfeeding's magical.
It is.
But when you were just saying about being fed and being topped up on the energy, because Edie lost a lot of weight because I was struggling to breastfeed it. That I think that I ended up having to syringe, express the colostrum and syringe it in so she had energy to then feed. Yeah. And that was one of the things I had to do early on. But it's so hard, and I think with George, my second, it was easy as pie, a few cabbage leaves, and I was like, I get it, I understand how easy it is. But with Edie, it was hard. It was toe curling. So I think
I'm hoping I'm going to have the same second time round, because sounds like our first times were kind of similar in that I had a lot of nipple pain.
Oh,
But
gosh, the nipple
I'm
pain.
hoping second time, everything, the body just remembers. Like,
Yeah.
oh, yes.
I think your nipples get toughened up
Yeah.
after.
We're doing this
don't they?
again.
But that brings it back to, right, if it was more publicly visible, it'd be a bit more normal, so you need what you look for, and it almost second time around is much easier because at least one of the two knows how to do it, right? So it's only the
Yes.
baby that needs to learn.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the thing, and I think, and also I wish that second night feeding was more known, because both times, like, they just, because they've come out of your tummy, they're all really well fed, and it takes 24 hours, and they're like, where's my ongoing food? And like both midwives have always, I've always had to ring the midwife being like, they are screaming, I can't get any more out, and it's waiting until your milk supply comes in, and that waiting, that crossover is like, oh, it's painful times.
I called the midwife, I think, every night for the first 5 nights, crying.
Like, here she is again.
Oh, my baby won't stop screaming. But yes, and he sucked so much that he got jaw fatigue, and his little jaw was quivering.
Aww.
But thankfully, I did actually have milk, so I could just hand express it into a little kind of syringy thing.
I think into his open mouth.
I could have tried that.
So hungry, aren't they? Hungry little beings.
Yeah. Anyway,
and I think that's the thing, is that, as you said, if it's talked about that first week, is like, just keep putting them on. If you're not sure, put them on.
Yeah, and it's normal if they cry a lot. That's just what babies do.
Yeah. Is there any other kind of research you'd like to do? Like, you think that'd be, apart from, obviously you've got your the ages, and how it affects in their life. Is there anything else you'd like to do, or you think would be great but haven't got it? You need the team and the money and the.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think so. We're learning to understand more about how in older age it benefits both mums and children to have a reduced risk of cardiovascular health. So we already know all of our cardiac babies, or a lot of them, will have slightly increased risk of having all these cardiovascular disease changes in later adulthood, because they are now surviving long enough to get these. So it'd be so interesting whether actually then the positive benefits of breast milk are magnified, and those that are kind of already have some negative pointers for whichever reason against them. So that is where we're really, really interested in seeing whether actually we can do some additional help. And, what I really would love to do more in is kind of understand the effects of breast milk compared to other medicines that we give patients as sort of preventative medicines. So we can kind of start quantifying, saying, well, actually breastfeeding your baby is the same as, I don't know, taking statin from your 20s onwards or something. So people get an idea about the I mean, I don't know whether that's, that's just a random thing, but, we get an idea about how much benefit that is.
How significant
so we can quantify it for parents, so they get an understanding. It's like, wow, actually, that's a huge effect, that I'm providing them for my child.
Yes. Psychologically, that would make a big difference, because people always compare the things like, there's some papers saying loneliness is as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. They compare those things. And if you can say that about breastfeeding is as good as the effects of a lifelong heart healthy diet.
Well, you've seen that in just saying to mums that to be able to feed them before their scan has this effect, and and so that, and you've had 100% like agreement to that, and like you can see that they need that kind of quantify, like, well, what does it actually mean, and what will that do? And I think that would be incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've kind of accidentally learned about, that actually, if the right motivation is there, everybody is on board, and it's about quantifying that motivation to say, well, actually, this is how positive the effect is, and maybe taking some of that emotiveness out of the discussion, right, and just saying, well, scientifically, this is the facts,
and not being afraid to say that, because it's fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said quickly, you said about how the mum's cardiovascular health can improve even if they weren't breastfed. How does that work with when they breastfeed? Their cardiovascular.
That's really interesting again, isn't it? I do wonder whether it's got something to do with the fact that you lose your baby fat quicker, right? I shrunk to size 8, right? From a size 12 while I was breastfeeding. I had no clothes that fit.
I was going to actually mention that because you said you did so much pumping. I said, wow, you must have been eating so much to make
marathon a day.
I know, and I shrunk. I had an empty wardrobe, because I'd given all my size 8s away. He was like, oh, I haven't worn them since my early 20s. I'm like, should have kept them. So
Yes.
so I think a lot of that will have to do with that, would have thought.
Okay,
And then
with that, okay.
obviously there's all this risk
guess-
about, reduced risk of breast cancer and those sort of things, probably just because obviously the breast tissue is being used.
And I guess if you lose the baby weight, and I guess it can have knock-on effects, like maybe you then feel more confident to start doing
More
your
exercise,
fitness
yeah.
routine again, and more exercise, and it's easier for you. And I don't know.
Yeah. It'll probably be indirect things like that. Again, I don't know whether actually many people have looked into that, but again, just looking at cohort studies, we can see that even as a mum, you then overall reduce your risk.
Well, it's all very good motivation for me in the coming months.
It's funny because like you hear like, oh, breast milk is naturally better, it's all best, but then it is, you say, the quantitative stuff that you do it because you're told that it's better. But actually hearing why it's better is definitely the sway that some people need. Like, they need to hear the reasoning. Whereas I was just brought up with the fact that my mum was always like, you want, I think that was a bit of a pressure as well. Like, I never wasn't going to, because my mum was like, I always breastfed you, it's the best thing for you, it's the most natural thing.
Really?
Although it doesn't mean it's the easiest, but she was like, she never thought of anything different when she had us, and she always like instilled it in us. So I was like, the stubbornness and the pride of me was like, I'm not going to give this up because my mum did it.
Oh, that's really good though. I mean,
yeah, but it's also in the mental state of it where I was like crying, my nipples are bleeding. I was like, I will persevere.
Yes. Well, for me, it helped because I love looking on Google Scholar. Yeah. So while I was hours and hours of breastfeeding, I was looking on my phone, finding all the papers relating breastfeeding to health outcomes on Google Scholar, because I'm such a nerd.
I was shopping at that point. I was like, 3 a.m. deliveries of clothes are coming. you were educating yourself.
Whereas I set up a whole mum support app. Do you know what I hated most about baby groups? It was always about babies. Did you notice that? When you go to baby groups. So while I was out in the middle of the night, it's like, I must change this. This is ridiculous. I'm on maternity leave where I was supposed to have a bit of peace and quiet. So I then, in the area I lived in Didcot at the time, I founded Didcot Baby Monday, which is actually still ongoing, providing amazing breastfeeding support. Because I was like, no, we need something about mums. So it was for mums to come there and kind of get their instinct, start trusting their instinct again. So we did talk a lot about, baby sleep and about those sort of things, but in a way that, it's like, trust your instinct, do what you think is right for your baby, not being externally told what to do. And so I'm quite severely lactose intolerant. So wherever I went, I could never eat the tea or the cake, right? I was like, oh. So we had like all different dietary requirements kind of catered for and volunteers. So the second you rocked up, you got your cup of tea, and then you got your cake, irrespective of what dietary requirement. Like, we made sure we had somebody for everything. And it was just about, it was like some TLC for mums. It was all this about stressed mums don't make milk. So just somewhere to just come and sit and chat. And it was all about mums. Obviously, babies welcome. But it was all about mums, and so that's still ongoing, still providing amazing breastfeeding support.
Oh,
so
well done.
That's
what I did in the middle of the night, going like, right, I must find some funding for this, and write some grant applications.
I feel like you two were far better than I was.
No, there was also a lot of late night shopping. There was, yes.
I was like, I was there like, my husband was like, oh, when did this get ordered? I was like, can't even remember.
Sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning.
I was like, who ordered this? It's free, right, when you're breastfeeding? It's free.
Yeah. When you're breastfeeding at like 3 or 4 in the morning, you feel like you deserve anything. You feel like, I'm doing such a good job, I deserve to buy this.
I did enjoy watching I think I watched Brooklyn 911, is it? And I watched like series of like comedies when I was breastfeeding, because it made me laugh and it made me feel really good. I was like, I need something funny on at 4 a.m.
That's what you need to get. Milk make it almost good.
I was like, I need all my comedies on.
At
4 in the morning, I'm like laughing and crying.
So we've gone through some amazing questions with you. Thank you so much. We have a few questions we always ask everyone, and you can answer them in any way you like. It doesn't have to be breastfeeding or your research specific, but for you personally, what does health and happiness look like?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I think the first thing that pops in my mind is I love nature. I absolutely love being connected with nature. So I spend a lot of my free time going camping, being out somewhere in remote places with lots of room between you and the next 10, so overlooking the sea or somewhere beautiful, and you kind of wake up and that first cup of tea in the morning, it's still a bit nice and frosty in the air and it's just fresh, and it's just the best ever, definitely.
Oh, nice. Even here in
I know
England.
I've got a bit of a track record with rain and camping. So whenever it rains, everyone
Wow.
texts like, Malenka, are you camping again? Because I mean, honestly, weather is just torrential. But there's always some sunshine. I always get my kind of happiness kick where I just sit there and it's dry enough to just take in the views.
Yeah.
Oh,
amazing.
nice.
Lovely. So nature
Yeah.
is very much related with health and happiness for you.
Definitely.
That's lovely.
That is nice. There is
Yeah.
something nice about being out where it's remote, as you said, and you just feel like you're the only person. It's so calm. It's so nice.
Nice. Yep. Well, how can our listeners find kind of a bit more about you, find out more about you, maybe
Your research.
support your research in some way? I don't know if that is a possibility or...
Yeah, so
can you-
obviously I work at the University of Leeds, so we all have our kind of page, which actually I need to update. I should add some of the breastfeeding research on it. It's not actually on there at the moment because it's like my sidekick, but I love my sidekick, I really do. And then actually a lot of the work that we do is funded by the Children's Heart Surgery Fund, which is our kind of Yorkshire-based children's heart surgery. So charity that supports all of
can
our
you say that again?
Children's Heart Surgery Fund. So they are a local charity that kind of supports our cardiac children, and they've supported a lot of the whole revamp of our breastfeeding.
Oh, amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah. So that's a charity that potentially, if people were motivated to, they could look it up and donate.
And I think
to
otherwise,
Yeah.
go and talk to your local hospital, donate some of your excess milk, even if it's just one bottle
Yeah.
a day, it does make a huge difference to some of those sick, either premature born babies or sick babies for other reasons.
Yeah, you've motivated me. I think, well, I had a bit of an oversupply with our first, and I have heard that with subsequent babies, you do tend to produce more. So if that happens again, you've now motivated me. I should.
Do you freeze it and just drop it off at the hospital?
Yeah, so it depends.
Is that what
Different
happens?
hospitals do different things. So in Oxford, they
Okay.
had like volunteers on bikes, scooters, who came with big freezer boxes like once a month and collected
To your
it to your
house?
house and collect it all. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, so
that
it's
would
actually
be handy because the hospital is very kind of difficult to get to from here.
Yeah, RUH is where we are is quite good. But also just the fact that you're a new mom, you've got all this thing, and like actually getting in the car with a new baby is
It's really
like
hard. Yeah.
to go to hospital is like if it can come to you, that's incredible. That's a great service.
So very much depends. But it was funny because in the end, I obviously eventually stopped, but I still had some of these milk bottles, empty milk bottles, because they wanted specific milk bottles that would fit into their machinery and stuff. And I still had some left, and they were like, "Oh no, they left the hospital. We can't have them back." So 10 years later, I've still got them. God knows how many times I've been through the dishwasher, but they're still working. They're still leak proof. And so I always bring my milk into work in those bottles and put them into our fridge, and nobody ever steals my milk because everyone always goes like, "Oh my God, she brought breast milk in or what?"
That is such a good idea.
That's brilliant.
You trick those milk thieves.
Yeah, absolutely. Still works 10 years on.
Just because yours is like you have to have lactose. Do you have like oat milk or almond
Well,
milk
I go for
or something?
lactose-free milk. I mean, that's a whole different story.
Okay,
isn't
so
it?
you have special. So if someone steals it, you're kind of
Yeah,
screwed.
I am very
If
screwed.
it's only like normal
Yeah,
milk.
totally.
Yeah,
That's amazing. I love that. That's such a good idea.
that's brilliant. Oh,
If I ever go to like an office, if I work again, I'll steal that idea.
It's genius.
take it.
Well,
take
especially
milk bottles.
especially in like a hospital, with a paediatric ward where everybody knows that's what breast milk bottles look like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one's
And
touching
every
it.
so often you get like
I
a
just
horrified
refuse.
look from somebody, especially somebody male, as you pour from that bottle into your tea, and they're like, "Are you drinking breast milk in your tea?"
It's like the whole. Have you seen that Friends episode where they won't try the milk? It's a really old one. But my husband was like that. Would not try. Like see if it was warm enough. He's like, and it was in a bottle. I'd go, yeah, it's fine. I'd give it to the baby. And I was like, if I'd warmed it up, or even if George's oat milk when because he had dairy intolerance, he wouldn't try the oat milk. And I'm like, why? It's just milk. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I tried my own breast milk a little bit, and I was
tastes so sweet.
trying to convince my husband to try it, but he did find it strange as well. But that's personal choice.
Absolutely.
I'm like, well, I made it.
Yeah,
trying it.
Exactly.
If we drink breast milk from a cow,
So what's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's been
Wonderful.
incredible. We'll put all those links to the funds and things on and if your page up, we'll put your page up
Yeah, I better
in the show
update it,
notes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've got about 3
Oh,
weeks
good.
until we publish.
We'll send you a reminder.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, that we'll do that. We'll add it all on so people can check out what you've been doing on your research.
Yeah. But it's been such a pleasure having you on tonight. You're such a bank of knowledge, and the fact that you fitted us in your busy schedule is also
Yeah, we
amazing.
really appreciate it.
No, it's been absolute pleasure to come. It's really nice to talk about my sidekick. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a nice
Thank
evening.
you. You too.
Bye.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. Well, we really enjoyed that episode, didn't we?
Yeah, it was lovely. It was nice to chat about how amazing breast milk is and how the wonderful things that Malenka's doing.
Absolutely.
And that research, I just can't get my head over how something so simple that, you think like just giving your baby some breast milk at the start, how the impact that has.
Yes, even saying how one syringe full can just make a difference between it for a tiny baby going into surgery straight away. It's really motivated me to try and donate some breast milk
nice.
this next time. We'll see. It's not always possible.
I think finding out the services that are available and if they can come pick it up would be a big advantage for a lot of people.
I think that's the thing that would stop me. If I had to drive all the way to the nearest hospital, that would be a big enough barrier for me not to do it. Yeah. So if they could pick it up.
Yeah, I think so many people would. Yeah, I think that's if the volunteers are there and things. But I think the fact that I was like, it was so nice to hear. I think it's interesting to hear as well that so many mums said yes to this because maybe the understanding of how important and how much of an effect it has. Like it just mums don't know that all the time. Yeah, they just know it's good, but to know the reasons why.
I genuinely think that the vast majority of mums, like especially with very poorly young babies, but any babies, if they genuinely knew all the evidence of the benefits, I think they would want to do it, and I think the majority want to breastfeed anyway. Yeah. But it's just that society doesn't make it easy, and there's so much misinformation and poor support and yada yada yada. So I do think that I give women a lot of credit. Yeah. I think the vast majority really want to do it for their babies.
Yeah, I think a lot of them do, and I think. Which is where it gets emotive because they may really have wanted to and it hasn't worked. Which is, there's no judgment there at all.
No, if it really doesn't work,
don't feel bad about that. I think it's one of the things. It's like it is what it is. Like but then I think. But a lot of people at the beginning don't understand. As I said, like my journey was definitely not an easy one for 6 weeks. It was like. Bleeding nipples, toe curling, mastitis in hospital overnight, like having a surgeon look at my boobs to see how bad it was. Like it was excruciatingly bad. I can't even describe. Like the pictures are just anything. My poor boobs. But then after 6 weeks, it clicked, and I luckily had a lactation consultant come out. It didn't all go smoothly then, and I know other people it hasn't gone smoothly for. But then it did click, and it was amazing. But I know it's not that way for everyone. But I just. Having the information and knowledge, I didn't even have all the information, which I think would have pushed me further. Yes. So I think that the support has to be there and the information has to be there. And I completely understand why people are like, the mental side is so hard.
Yes, it's a tough job.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's the most natural thing, but it's not the easiest thing. It's very, very tough. And I respect the womankind for doing this.
We are just magical.
Yes.
Magical bodies.
I remember when I was breastfeeding and I just kept saying to Michael, biology is so sexist. Why can only women do this?
They have a bit of fun at the start. And
there's nothing and then Michael said, I'm so sorry, I would. If I
that's
could,
the
I
thing,
would.
But then they just need to. Then that's amazing. He was like that, but also then the men just need to feed. Like I do remember, to be fair to Neil, he made me some amazing yogurt and granola, and like the first few days of eating him born, and it was like. Having amazing like ramen food and was like the food was amazing those first week, but then he disappeared like after the second week. I was like, who will feed me? Like a little bird, feed me somebody.
No, I was lucky because Michael doesn't work away like Neil does. He did feed me like big cheesy omelettes every day for like at least 6 months. More cheese, more calories.
You're pregnant and about to breastfeed, you need to prep the man or the partner in your life.
They need to know how to cook.
Yes. Or just know how to order. Or freeze, or get people to freeze meals for you, or cook now and get them to defrost the meals.
Yes. Yeah. No, you need to know how to cook, I think, in this day and age.
Yeah. You do. True.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think on that bombshell,
we're going to leave it, and we'll see you on Thursday for Weekly Waffle.
Weekly Waffle. So yes, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you again
very soon
on Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us on hello@healthandhappinesspodcast.com.
Or we'd love to connect with you on our Instagram, Facebook or TikTok pages.
You'll find the links to all our socials and more on our website, www.healthandhappinesspodcast.com.
And lastly, before you go, please give our podcast a rating and a review. It really helps others find us.
See you next week.
Bye.